Hi, David.
Hi, Laura.
Okay, the thing that I wanted to preface the thing you're going to say is that Tim Ferriss went on I think, Vipassana meditation retreat, which is 10 days silent meditation.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that.
You're not speaking. Yeah. And he went into a state of psychosis. And so there is quite a significant, I want to say 10% of people, you have to do a very specific intake for doing any of these retreats, because a good chunk of people, when they sit down, they go into a psychosis because they have so many things operating to distract them from their trauma that when you remove those things forcibly by like taking away interactions from about people, blah, 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 those are their psychic protections against this overwhelming thing and so for Tim Ferriss, it was sexual abuse as a child. And so he just kind of lost his mind. Luckily, Jack Kornfield, I think, was either on the retreat or he was a mentor of his at the time, and he just kind of pulled him back from the edge. So I'm probably butchering a lot of details, but I think the article that you are referring to would make a lot more sense if we just preface it by that sort of contextual information.
That makes sense. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is AI psychosis, allegedly AI being able to push people into psychosis. Psychosis is a pretty big deal, right? It's a break where you can't stop thinking about things and you've kind of lost connection with reality. Now you're saying...
what I'm saying is that making people sit cross-legged on a small cushion will push people into psychosis, a good chunk of the population.
Yeah, so you're saying that meditation itself, just like you've been in meditation retreats, you've done Vipassana, is that right? Vipassana?
Vipassana, thank you.
Vipassana, that's it, okay.
Yeah.
So you were talking about Tim Ferriss kind of
he did a Vipassana retreat. I've done Vipassana. Yeah. I've done multiple different types of meditation and multiple different solo and group retreats, up to a month. So I am well versed. I've trialed this, and it is, I started reading it, and not that people don't go into psychosis, but I think that correlation is not causation. The same people that are going into psychosis with ChatGPT, it's kind of like being left alone with your thoughts with artificial intelligence in the room.
Okay.
Whereas when you go into a retreat, the commonality amongst all of the meditation types and structures and formats and retreats, and I've done multiple different ones, is you're left alone with your thoughts. And that alone is what causes the psychosis for people.
Okay, so you said there's an intake process to avoid that. I want to hear more about it, but let's kind of set up with the article so that we don't get too far away from that.
Yeah.
So what this article is, it's an article in, I guess, Futurism, and it is talking about, the title of it is People Are Being Involuntarily Committed or Jailed After Spiraling into ChatGPT Psychosis. And the idea here is that people essentially start talking to a chat model, and then some small percentage of them just seems to like be unable to kind of stop talking to it, or it reinforces delusions like about their role in society or things like that. And so some people and these are people who have never really shown any signs of psychosis, which is very unusual. Like normally psychotic breaks generally manifest in your 20s, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, we're going to talk about a couple different types of psychosis though, because I think that you are touching on an important point, which is that all psychosis is not the same. So people will have psychotic breaks that are very normal people. Like Tim Ferriss, he's been in the public eye, I think, for decades before this psychotic break, which I think he only talked about after he fully recovered. Like it wasn't immediately. He wasn't talking about it while he was in it.
Yeah.
It was a kind of a big splash of a podcast episode that he did. And he would be considered the opposite of somebody that would be going into psychosis, like high achiever, top 10 performer, very much in control, one of the tech bros, Princeton or Harvard grad, so different.
But your point is that this is somebody who's got his life together.
Yes.
So there's a wave of people in their case who have frequently have a psychotic break and just become kind of dysfunctional. But you're saying that there's a known phenomenon with people who are not that. These are people who are functional, and certain like very introspective things like Vipassana meditation or other types of meditation could cause them to kind of leave their zone of functionality and become very non-functional.
Yeah. So basically when you suffer a trauma, you build yourself a little egg. You get hurt, you build yourself a little egg, and that hardens you. And so I just use the egg analogy because if you think of a break, it makes more sense if you think your egg broke.
Okay.
Not that you broke inside the egg, but your egg broke.
Your protective shell that keeps you within your zone of functionality gets broken, and now all of a sudden...
And they call that a psychotic break, but I think it's important to confuse this protective shell breaking with your noggin not working anymore.
All right, that's helpful. So let me read a little bit of this story so the listeners get grounded in it. So, speaking to futurism, a different man recounted his 10-day whirlwind descent into AI-fueled delusion, which ended with a full breakdown and multi-day stay in a mental care facility. He turned to ChatGPT for help at work. He'd started a new high-stress job, and he was hoping the chatbot could expedite some administrative tasks. Despite being in his early 40s with no prior history of mental illness, he soon found himself absorbed in dizzying, paranoid delusions of grandeur, believing that the world was under threat, and it was up to him to save it. Now, so this guy's under stress to start with.
And let me just throw one more thing into your mix. Sure, that I know that is being read as like delusions of grandeur, but the world is under stress. It is up to us to save it. I'm just going to say that there is a misunderstanding in common therapy speak, which I vehemently disagree with, which is that delusions of grandeur equal psychic break, because I would say that low self-esteem is considered to be a sign of mental health, but it's actually, to my mind, a delusion of grandeur, because when you have narcissistic traits, you either have the delusion of grandeur or you consider yourself like bottom of the barrel. And so people think that this false humility is the same as having a healthy ego state.
Okay.
So I'm questioning whether this guy, other people might look at him and say that's a psychotic break.
Yeah.
But maybe he is getting in touch with his inner warrior princess.
Okay, so that's a good point. So, and this gets back to what you were talking about like, you know, the phenomena of people who kind of losing their touch with reality and having a psychotic break in their 20s may be different than people who have later career, I guess, shifts out of their zone of functionality into a zone of non-functionality. And that's really what we're talking about with mental illness, right? The idea is that you're supposed to essentially...
It's hard to talk about mental illness. It's just hard to talk about it because you can't talk about it like it's one thing.
Let's kind of ground by starting at like, what's mental health, what's mental illness? And they're culturally defined, right? It basically comes down to your ability to operate within the culture in a way that's productive.
What I see working with children is that there is a very strong denial protective function in all kids. Kids can come out of the worst situations and they're still living in those situations. They can look happy and they can be happy. They're not putting on a show for you. They have no idea what they're dealing with every day. So those are the kinds of people which might then have a psychotic break in their 40s when they're talking to ChatGPT, only because suddenly the blinders are ripped off quickly. Because a lot of LLMs, you would say it's an acceleration. It's a speed situation. So if you take somebody who's had these layers of the protective childhood denial, which has never been removed, and suddenly, this happens to me all the time using that app that I created. Yeah. So I'll just say blathering, which has a lot of denial incorporated into it to protect my own psyche. And then the LLM will be like, well, what's happening here is, bleh. And I'll go like, yes, but that hurt. And I've just been like, every time I go and I do the protocol that I, like the prompt, I get hurt. Like this morning, it was very painful. So if you're not because
like... You've taught it to strip away the delusions. And the delusions are protective, right? Exactly.
And I've done a lot of meditation and a lot of therapy. Like I'm versed in getting punched in the face and then being like, okay, it's cool. We're just going to let this pass. But if you're not, I could see it being extremely disorienting.
Yeah, and so what we're getting here is reports of a couple of different people, a couple of different situations where they engage with a chatbot and then they get into a loop. And I think this gets to what you're talking about, a tight spiral loop. And I think I see how that's happening because of the way that chatbots work. They're always like, it's a conversational turn. So I'll go back to that in a second. So they get into this loop and then they start to drift from their reality. They're centering in where they normally consider themselves. And this drift is what people are talking about, where they suddenly, like their spouse says, oh, they become unrecognizable, or they have this crazy obsession with this thing. And sometimes they're actually getting committed. Now, some of these people have a history of mental illness. Not so surprising, right?
Yeah.
But other ones don't, where it's just like, it seems like they're just like, oh, this will really help me with my job. And then they just become progressively obsessed and spiral into this kind of dark, tight spiral with AI. And the article talks about a couple of the specific things where like it might reinforce their delusion, be like, oh yes, I totally agree with you with the sycophancy or the high agreeableness that we've trained in the models. And so then of course it goes into the, we got to regulate this. What are we going to do? And I don't actually necessarily disagree with this, which is unusual coming from me, because usually I'm like, yeah, okay, first off, first, I roll to disbelieve that this is really happening the way it's described, right? And second, I don't think regulating everything is the answer. But I actually think in this case that there are some problems in there, and we can maybe dig that up and talk about it.
Oh, yeah. I wonder if LLMs will become the new gun enforcement, like battlefield, where people think, oh, maybe. No regulation, lots of regulation, because guns don't kill people. People kill people. But if you've got some crazies, you probably don't want them to have guns.
Yeah. So then we just engage in this back and forth battle over that. That might happen. That's actually an interesting point, because AI provides tremendous capability. And how regulated do you want your AI to be? Like as a free speech issue, for example, if you control what it knows, which there's a lot of back and forth about that too, where like this model is aligned to this political idea, this model is aligned differently. And it could be a battle.
And I also fully agree with you about the agreeableness being definitely a red flag for me. Like the prompt gives me a like metaphorical punch in the face every morning just to like keep me humble.
Yep.
It is something that I have explicitly removed from my LLM, that agreeableness.
Yeah.
Because
that's true.
When I see
because you've made it more confrontational. You've made it be willing to challenge you. More challenging.
And all of my prompts involve point out where my blind spot is, which is a nicer version of not triggering its be pleasing training, but telling it, don't just agree with me. Because we have leading the witness as a thing for a reason in court, because you can lead the LLM.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, wouldn't you say that and then give it a forced choice scenario where, of course, like either way that it's agreeing with you is not... When have you heard an LLM saying, like, actually, both of your suppositions are wrong? It's actually a third thing that you haven't even brought into the conversation yet. It only responds to what you bring into the conversation. If you don't bring something into the conversation because you don't believe it or it doesn't exist, then it can have a flat earther conversation with you, no problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think both you and I have seen that, like, have it challenge us, but we tune our prompts specifically to make it challenge us, right?
I got to put that in, otherwise.
Yeah.
And even when I don't, I tend to cut my conversations off at the 20-minute mark because it will start a spiral where it's just agreeing with me and we're getting off topic. And your thing with the research about the different places to live showed the same complexity being created. Yeah,
that's true. So like when I'm trying to do scientific work, one thing that I will do is frequently have it, I'll say, act as a PhD level researcher and critic, or you are a PhD thesis advisor, critique this work. And that puts it inherently into kind of an adversarial position where it's looking to find fault. But you're right, by default, the standard chat alignment, I see how we got here, right? We got here because people are like, well, we need to make chatbots that people want to talk to. So what does that mean? It means that they have to be reasonably agreeable, and actually AI chatbots are aligned to be highly agreeable, like on the Big Five trait openness scale.
I would say they're unbalanced, honestly.
Yes, yeah, they're very agreeable, much more so than almost all the population, right? So we skew them way towards agreeableness.
Yeah, which is a marketing ploy. Who's going to pay $35 a month to have somebody go like, Tony, you're a real idiot?
I mean, I don't think that they do it. I don't think the AI companies do it for product engagement reasons so much as just to make it. Or no, let me say that wrong. I don't think the companies are doing it in a profit-seeking, attention-maximalizing way in the way that, say, social media companies were.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that you're not going to talk to a friend who's always insulting you. Yeah, so they're erring on the side of it. I wonder if it's just as easy as adding a toggle switch to the interface. Because my brother has said the same thing in his work with LLMs. He's like, it drives me crazy that they are just blowing smoke up my ass all the time. Yeah. How do I make it stop telling me that I'm right? Because I know I'm not. And like, well, you actually tell it this. But
that's a good point. It might be a good area to have a toggle switch. So so let's start at the beginning. You're an AI company, right? You want to bring a product to market. You want to have a conversational chatbot. Well, it has to be good at holding a conversation. What does that mean? That leads you down two paths. First is you want to make it agreeable, because disagreeable people are not good to have conversations with. And so we end up with the AI being very aligned, like hyper aligned to agreeableness, which can lead to sycophancy. And actually frequently in training, they need to back that off and make it less agreeable. The other part of it...
To get anywhere, you mean? They do that in training? What do you mean they do that in training?
Well, like they're measuring the alignment of their model, right? So they'll have a checkpoint release. First, you're just teaching it things, right, to master its data set. And then you start to teach it more appropriately how to hold conversations and be aligned to the values that you want to have and the responses that you want to have. So if, for example, you're doing reinforcement learning through human feedback, you have a team of human evaluators who are like, this is not a good response. This response is a 2 out of 5. Here's what's wrong with it. And what they're doing is basically rating it on its ability to hold a conversation. Because if you don't like the conversation, nobody will use the chatbot, to your point.
Right.
But then, so that's the agreeableness. So you want it to be able to hold a conversation. As part of that, it has to be relatively agreeable, because disagreeable people aren't, they're just like, screw you, go away. It's not a good conversation, right? So you need to tune towards more agreeableness. They tend to tune way too agreeable. And now frequently companies are having to roll it back. Like, is this too agreeable? So you'll see in their data sets, they'll have tests like, is it sycophantic? Is it just agreeing all the time, blowing smoke up your ass? This is amazing and profound thing they've written. You're like, it's not really, right?
Yeah. I mean, the first time you're like, I must have said something amazing. Yeah. The 10th time you're like, I don't know if I've had 12 brilliant ideas in the last 20 minutes.
Yeah. Like, it's okay, right?
Yeah.
So you have to back that off. And they do that in training, but we do it in prompting too. Like, both you and I tend to pitch our models to be a lot more adversarial in our prompts, so that we're able to use them to get effective criticism. Because you're not going to get better if you just sit in that spiral of it being like, yes, sycophantically, that's the best thing ever written. Oh, you're right, it's great. That is the kind of thing I think that is happening to these people. The second part of it, so the first part is the sycophancy. The second part is that it's just part of the nature of the conversational interface is it's a spiral, because it's a chat turn. So it's a conversational turn, meaning I do something, then you do something, then I do something, then you do something. And the problem with that is I think that actually hacks a small set of people who themselves are so agreeable that they won't stop the conversation.
Yeah.
And so
I can
just keep going.
I can often feel like when using it for self-therapy, I can often feel when I've said something and what it's given back to me is not on the money. And so then I'll go back to it and I'll say, actually, I don't think that's what's happening. I think it might be more this. And I'm feeling around in the dark of my own psyche. And it's going, absolutely, that's brilliant. And then it's feeding that back to me. But I'm going, now that you fed it back to me and I can see it as a mirror, I don't think that's actually what's happening. I think I'm wrong. I think it might actually be completely over this direction. And this actually might be what's going on. And then it mirrors that back. And I go like, oh yeah, that's on the money. That hurt.
But you're able to do that because you have enough disagreeableness to be like, I'm not sure about that, right? And just push back against the model, right?
Absolutely.
Imagine that you're like kind of just a marshmallow. You're not very disagreeable, and you'll just accept whatever. And so you get into a spin cycle with that you can't even end because you're too polite to really hit the, to walk away from the computer. You're in a spin cycle with this very high agreeable model, and then you've got a couple bad ideas, and then you're just being agreeable at each other. I think you can drift into spiraling further away from reality based off that.
It happens to me often, so I don't think it's even a can. I'm saying it does frequently for me.
Yeah, so what happens with you is you self-correct it because you're disagreeable enough to be like, you know what, this is BS. I think we're blowing smoke up each other's butts at this point. Some people can't do that. So this is like, let's maybe make an analogy to drinking or especially to gambling, right? So remember we're in the New World, when the explorers met the New World, right? Native Americans is very low resistance to alcohol. And so it just caused massive social problems. Now, some of that's probably genetic because we'd had alcohol for a long time in the old world. And so we developed more resistance to it. But also part of it's temperamental, like, you grew up drinking and you knew like you got drunk at a certain point and you knew your limits and all that stuff. And so you're pushing people into essentially the kind of, in older life, into the kind of problems that you had as an adolescent in medieval Europe or, early colonial Europe. So part of it is just exposure to something that they weren't prepared to deal with.
That's a good point, David, because I'm thinking of grade 10 when we all started drinking. Unsupervised. If ChatGPT is a bottle of Bud Light, then the only people that could handle themselves at those parties was Erica, who had a German father and who had been given small amounts of wine at dinner since she was 15. Yep.
She's immunized, right?
She's immunized. She was immunized. So she, she has a couple of beers and she's like, oh, I'm good. And we're like, we have no idea what we're doing here. And then, Sarah would always end up like, we had to give her a cold shower because she got alcohol poisoning, like every single time. And I think that it might be a temporal shift issue is what you're saying, not a permanent structural issue. We're just not able to handle this influx of like psychic intrusions. It's something that like they can really get to the feels. LLMs.
Yeah, I think it's sort of like, I think this is a problem that's going to solve itself. For the extent of people who have this specific part, who get into the problem this vector, through this direction, I think that will solve itself because children are just going to grow up with models and they're never going to have this experience of suddenly being locked into a tight conversational spiral with a hyper agreeable, authoritative source. They're just like, no, that's just the AI. This is how they are. I've learned from an early age a little bit of wine, a little bit of beer, and I'm immunized to the narcissism of the AI.
Also, I could see that if you are a person, say this guy, who's never felt comfortable going to therapy, doesn't have close friends, has never had anybody listen to you, and all of a sudden there's somebody who you can summon at will, intensely listening, that would be addictive, to say the least.
So here's another thing that I think that is kind of coming from a different direction. We'll take gambling. So with gambling, most people are able to gamble and stop. But there are some people that it just hits a dopamine exploit in their heads and they just kind of can't stop, right? That's gambling addiction, and that's where you've got a gaming problem. If you're in the gaming industry, there's responsible gaming. They make you like give people resources, look for signs of addictive behavior. So there's a certain subset of the population that your product is just going to like hit like a bomb. They're just not able to deal with it appropriately. And this might be, so normally when we see the AI made me go baddie or whatever, these kind of stories, I'm normally pretty negative on them. I'm probably like, first off, did it really happen? And second, is it everyone wants to blame the AI alignment company? But I actually think that there are a couple of things that you could do here to specifically, once you identify the patterns of behavior, the kind of patterns of people that are particularly susceptible to these negative interactions, there are some things that you could do to stop them. So for example, maybe you have just a limit on how many conversational turns you can have. And then it's like, okay, you know what? I think we're kind of done for now. Why don't you go do something else for a while?
Well, like the bartender that cuts you off.
Yeah, right?
That makes sense, because if I think about our like high school parties, there was Erica on one end who could was unaffected because she had been immunized. There was me who definitely was every time going like, oh, that was too many. That was like, okay, but I was looking for standards that I could then intellectually measure.
Feeling out the terrain.
Yeah, I was like, I only bring 4 beers to parties. That's, unless I want to throw up. But then there was a friend of mine who later on, like not diagnosed, but was an alcoholic the whole time, but later on said, oh, I'm an alcoholic. And I was like, oh, you know what? That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
but at the time,
right?
We didn't know what those things were. So I was just like, oh, she never learned about the 4. She totally knew about the 4, but she could not stop at 4.
Right. So when you roll this stuff out across a wide population, you encounter the people who have kind of whatever like inbuilt weakness to that specific pattern of interaction that's just going to capture them. And then you can maybe engineer some things around it. So I do think there's some things you could do. Like you could have a, that's good, let's go away for now button, for example, because part of the problem with the conversational loop is if you're too polite, there's no way to end it, right? What do you do?
Right. And I wonder if the LLM would be able to, I'm sure they would be able to recognize when they've entered this loop themselves. And there could be just a flag that comes up.
Yep. That would be another thing, is have the LLM the ability to pause the conversation or say, I'm kind of done for now. And the third is just mechanical limits. Right?
Mechanical limits, but
just you get 10 conversational turns, and then you got to go run up the stairs, satisfy your Fitbit or something, right?
Yeah, or even I was just thinking like a little like notification comes on. Oh, this conversation is getting solipsistic.
Yeah, that would be a good one too. Right.
Yeah.
So
it
once you
doesn't have
identify
to
that
actually
problem,
control anybody, but it gives me more information. Oh, the algorithm's telling me this isn't that awesome for me anymore. Yeah,
so like one thing you could have, like in AI, they'll have guardrails with agentic systems where the guardrail is essentially deciding whether the output's valid or not. But what you could do, and it's really another AI observing or another turn of the AI itself observing its own output. But think of it as like a second watcher watching the conversation, be like, oh no, that's protected data. You cannot let that out there. Oh, this is a conversational topic that has strayed into one of the verboten topics. We can't have that conversation on our website. What you could do, what you're suggesting, is not have it shut down the conversation, but just have another one monitoring it and observing the conversation. Like this AI is starting to get very sycophantic. Yeah.
I think that
good idea.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Well,
I like it.
I like it too. Yeah, definitely the terrain is getting not subtle, but more differentiated.
Yeah, we're past the initial wonder, and now we're on to there are subtle harms in there for certain populations, and we should tease them out and figure out what we could do about it.
Yeah. Thanks, David.
Thank you.